Hi, and welcome to Epochs number 16, Roman Britain, hosted by me, Bodade, aka History Bro, joined by Big Josh Firm. How are you doing?
I'm not doing too well. I'm a bit unwell, but I should be all right.
Oh, okay.
Gonna this conversation is gonna lift my spirits, so it's gonna make
Hopefully.
me feel better, I think.
Hopefully, yeah. Well, I thought what we'd do is take a sort of a whirlwind tour of Roman Britain, just sort of an overview, nothing too in depth, and just talk about kind of everything from Caesar, Julius Caesar, the first incursions, and sort of some of the main points in the early conquest of Roman Britain, and with a few quotes from a few of the different historians, and let's see what we can talk about.
Yeah, so I think my familiarity with the actual subject matter is I know a lot about Caesar, and then from about that point onwards, that's about it.
Right.
So I'm going to be a bit of a blank slate from Caesar onwards, I think.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, just to give an overview on it, the first Roman incursions into Britain were Julius Caesar in 55 BC, and then again the very next year, 54 BC, because of course you count down BC, so 54 is after 55. But those Caesar's incursions were never to conquer Britain at all.
It
Not
was
even
more
close.
of a kind of scouting mission, and it was for clout
Yes.
mainly for Caesar. I get the impression that he was doing it to say he had been there, just so that it would help him politically back in Rome, because of course at the time he had some problems with Rome, to say the least, and obviously they were trying to persecute him for his illegal war in Gaul, and to kind of win support, he's going to go over to Britain to kind of win people over. That's the impression I would get, that he's this explorer that's expanding the knowledge of the Roman Empire, and that's kind of his motivation, to kind of both scout out the territory and also to get a claim for himself.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. It's more politics than anything else, the reason why he did it. Yeah, we can go into all those details you mentioned. One of the big ones was to be able to claim that you've done it, because nobody
Oh
else
yeah,
had done it
he was
before.
the first person to do it,
So
and
that's a big thing.
that sticks out in people's minds, even though, lots of people have done things better than the first person in many different areas. They're always the ones that are remembered the most.
Yeah, yeah, he's the pioneer, absolutely. So we'll talk about that for a bit. And then maybe some of the other sort of big points. So when Caligula, his aborted attempt to invade Britain, and when Claudius finally did in sort of the 40s AD, and then the Boadician revolt a bit after that in the 60s, the early 60s
Is
AD,
that
and then talk all about Agricola and Tacitus's Agricola and stuff like that. Sorry, go on. You're just going to say
there's
something.
a bit of a difference in how I've heard people talk about. You called her Boadicea. I
Oh,
know her
the
as Boudica.
pronunciation,
Yeah,
of course. Sorry, go on.
I've always known her as Boudica, but Boadicea sounds a bit more Roman sounding to me. So I can understand where it might have come from, but I don't really understand the difference there. Why did she have two different names?
Okay, well, I mean, I could say a bit about that right now. I mean,
Sure.
there's actually loads of different ways to pronounce it. Loads, like half a dozen or more. And you're supposed to say Boudica now. Apparently,
Okay.
that is the agreed thing. However, I was raised that she was called Boadicea, and so I shall always call her Boadicea. Something about Boudica just doesn't sit right with me. I mean,
I know what you mean. When you're familiar with a word, any kind of change in how it's pronounced or anything like that just sounds like blasphemy.
yeah, yeah. Plus, I'm really conservative with name changes. Like, I still call Snickers a marathon. Starbursts are opal fruits, as far as I'm concerned.
Like a PR person's worst nightmare. They
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
rebrand with you.
I insist on calling Istanbul Constantinople. Still,
Well,
just this is what it is.
I definitely agree with that one.
So I'm not calling Boadicea Boudica.
That's fine. I just didn't understand the difference between
I
the
will
two.
take any and all ire in the comments over that. And well, I'm not going to call. I think it's not really an Americanism, but like, why would I start calling aluminium aluminum? I'm not. It's not going to happen. Or the Caribbean, the Caribbean, or the Renaissance, the Renaissance. No. So it's Boadicea for me. But I think they do agree that you're supposed to say Boudica now, but
Isn't it
it's
a romanization anyway? So
Exactly.
it's not even her actual name per se.
exactly on Wikipedia. I looked at it the other day because of this actually, and there's loads of different names. People in the Victorian days called her slightly different variants on it. So there's a few different ways you can say it. But anyway, that's a small point. It's funny
Sorry to
how
go off
actually
on
a
the,
lot of people are hung up on that a bit, though. It's funny how much that comes up whenever you mention Roman Britain. But so anyway, should we just kick off?
Absolutely.
We'll start with Caesar's account, because that's one of the things that when people don't know anything about history, ancient history, and you mention that there's a book written by Julius Caesar that you can just buy
Yeah,
now
it's
in
amazing,
Penguin
really.
paperback. Some people not they don't believe you, but it seems hard to believe.
Now you bring it up.
Julius Caesar. You can get a Penguin paperback for like $7.99 or whatever it is.
It's a point of great shame that I don't own that book, because I've heard so many passages from it and I know the actual history he's describing inside out, but I've never actually read the account for myself. So I disavow myself for doing so.
Well, what it is he refers to himself in the third person. So he talks about Caesar did this, he did that, and went there. But it's written by him, or at least his freedman.
I wonder if that had the same connotations in the past with royalty, because of course the accusation was Caesar wanted to make himself a king, wasn't it? And then he writes his autobiography in third person, kind of alludes to that kind of grandiose attitude to oneself.
I think it's less the sort of royal third person.
Yeah.
That it's just sort of more formal. I think that was just more done in the ancient world. Or, even now, if you're writing an essay, formally, you're supposed to refer to if you ever refer to yourself, you don't really say I, do you, in an essay? You're not really supposed to say I think this, I think that. You're supposed to write the author thinks this.
It's
the
weird
same
to
sort of
think
thing.
that-
It's over the top, but it's just it's just the way
It
it is.
seems strange to me that some kind of grammatical convention survived 2071 years.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
even
quite
more
right.
than that, isn't it? It's never mind.
Yeah. So yeah, he talks about himself in the third person, but it's really interesting, and of course you have to take it all with a pinch of salt. I mean,
Of
you
course.
can only imagine he's making himself look good, putting rose tinted lenses on everything. Although he does mention sometimes when things don't go his way. But what it was, his excursions into Britain are only a very small part of it. The book is all about his conquest of Gaul, of which this is only just a couple of summers in many years.
He
worth
kind of
of
mentions
campaigning.
it in passing almost, doesn't he? Like,
Almost, yeah. I mean, there's a few pages, but out of the whole thing, it's not that much. It's sort of like, and this happened. It's just sort of to add to his tick list of great achievements, I think.
I haven't even read this book, which is, of course, as I mentioned, a point of great shame, which I should be ashamed of. But even I understand that his presentation of things, especially in Gaul, is not entirely accurate. And he talks about army losses and things like that. And obviously, the numbers don't always add up the way he's talking about them, in that he's just like, oh, we only lost a few hundred or such and such, when we know that the likelihood is it was far greater than that, and he is using a bit of the audience's or the reader's naivety to his advantage in presenting himself as positively as possible, because of course Gaul was a bit of an unknown territory, wasn't it? They obviously knew it existed and they knew about it, but it was kind of very foreign and mysterious, and doubly so for Britain.
Oh, absolutely, more for Britain. Yeah, I mean, the Gauls had the Celts of France. They'd already had a long relationship with, shall we say, by the time of Caesar. But Britain was much more unknown, and in fact, that's one of the questions that historians argue about. Exactly, sort of how unknown was it? Does what Caesar say, is it accurate, or is he playing it up or playing it down for whatever reason? I mean, let me read a couple of quick paragraphs here. It's sort of right in the middle of the action. For some reason, Caesar decides to sort of interrupt an action scene to just describe Britain in general terms, and then goes on to continue the action scene. But he says this, Quote, "The interior of Britain is inhabited by people who claim, on the strength of an oral tradition, to be Aboriginal. The coast by Belgic immigrants who came to plunder and make war, nearly all of them retaining the names of the tribes from which they originated and later settled down to till the soil. The population is exceedingly large." That's another thing. At other points, people have said that Britain's relatively unpopulated compared to mainland Europe, but Caesar here says that it's exceedingly large. The ground thickly studded with homesteads, closely resembling those of the Gauls, and the cattle very numerous. For money, they use either bronze or gold coins or iron ingots of fixed weights. Tin is found inland, and small quantities of iron near the coast. The copper that they use is imported. There is timber of every kind, as in Gaul, except beech and fir. Hares, fowl and geese they think is unlawful to eat, but rear them for pleasure and amusement. The climate is more temperate than in Gaul, the cold being less severe. End quote.
Yeah, there's some unusual stuff there that is very strange, I suppose. Like rearing was it hares and geese?
Hares, fowl and geese.
Hares, fowl and geese, just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I find that a little bit hard to believe that, they had it so good in Britain that they were raising fowl for fun.
Yeah.
Like,
for amusement.
Okay.
It's funny because that's great. One of the great things about ancient history is that you get a line like that. There's no further explanation. You can't ask Caesar exactly what he meant. So you've just got that one line, those lines, and you make of it what you will. I mean, not many people agree that the cold is less severe in England than France.
I know it firsthand. Yeah.
All right. And there's other places in other accounts where they say, yeah, no, it's much more rainy and dim and dark and horrible and damp in Britain than in Gaul. But Caesar himself doesn't say that.
Didn't you talk about that in one of your previous epochs? I've forgotten the name of the guy. Was it Pythias the Greek?
That was one of them, yeah.
Went around Britain, didn't he?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. He went up to probably the Orkneys.
And his description was relatively bleak. And I think that's far more accurate, saying it's grim and always rainy and miserable.
Yeah.
That sounds about right to me. Whereas Caesar saying, "Oh yeah, it's even better than Gaul. It's nice. You need to go on holiday there."
But suddenly you think, what is he saying there? There's a quote I haven't picked out, but there's one bit where he mentions the pearls. You can get pearls in Britain or on the south coast, but they're not that good. They're like kind of off colour. Like not all diamonds are white. You can get yellow diamonds and pink diamonds, black diamonds, can't you? Or blue diamonds. Well, it's the same with pearls. Only the sort of best ones are like that pure white sort of colour. You can get all sorts of off-colour pearls. And anyway, there's lots of pearls on the south coast of Britain, but they're kind of, dark blue or something, or sort of greyish in colour, so they're not that prized, but
it's
still.
a weird thing for him to mention, because I grew up on the south coast of Britain, and I didn't even know we could get pearls here, so I thought it's something that you get elsewhere.
All been plundered in ancient
Apparently
times.
so.
No, I don't know about that. I've made that up for comic effect. There's this other paragraph, if I could just read real quick. It's sort of a general thing he says. Caesar says, by far the most civilised inhabitants are those living in Kent.
Okay.
Whose way of life differs little from that of the Gauls. Most of the tribes in the interior do not grow corn, but live on milk and meat and wear skins. All the Britons dye their bodies with woad, which produces a blue colour, and shave their whole bodies except for the head and the upper lip. Wives are shared between groups of 10 or 12 men, especially between brothers and between fathers and sons, but the offspring of these unions are counted as the children of the man with whom a particular woman cohabited first. So there you go.
That's a lot to unpack. I find it hard to believe some of that, particularly the woman shared between 12 men. I mean, I think that's against human nature for that to be the case. I don't think you can have a society that would last for very long if that was a common practice.
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's all sorts of polygamous societies in the world, though, aren't there? Have they not been? I think there have been.
I don't know. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm just a psychologist.
I was reading Tacitus's Agricola and the Germania, and in the Germania, where he talks about Germany, he sort of makes a point of saying that the Germans, or lots of the German tribes, keep one wife, and that's odd, and that's not usual, to keep one wife and stay with her and be faithful to her. that's sort of worth remarking upon for being unusual. So
Yeah, I think some of the elements that Caesar's mentioning here, he's trying to paint a picture of these people as being as backwards as possible. That's an impression that I get throughout a lot of his mention of the Britons, is that he wants to paint them as being these really unusual people, because of course that elevates his kind of claim to being the first person to have gone there, because he's just like, well, I went to this really interesting place where everyone did really strange things, and it makes him seem all the more interesting and worth keeping around, I suppose.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.